Dr. Judy Morgan really needs no introduction from me or anyone. She has an absolute wealth of knowledge and she is one of the biggest names out there. And she was incredibly kind to share some of her thoughts with me in an interview. The whole interview is literally full of knowledge nuggets that you can apply to your dog or cat's health. So I highly encourage you to watch all the way through, because towards the end, she really does reveal something very, very kind of her. But to start, I asked her, what is the deal with DCM and grain-free foods? Do grain-free foods cause dilated cardiomyopathy in dogs? Take it away.
We don't have proof on that. There's a lot of politics involved in pet food, and oh man, I could give you my 27 conspiracy theories, but I can also give you the science, which basically FDA finally stated after many years of research, supposedly, that they found no link between grain-free diets and DCM. And the original paper that came out was based on a little over 500 cases of DCM. And if we look at the number of dogs and cats eating grain-free diets just in the US alone, and if grain-free diets are a cause of DCM, we should literally have millions and millions of pets with dilated cardiomyopathy. With that said, a lot of the animals in that original group, and even since then, their taurine levels are just fine. It's not a lack of taurine. For some animals, yes, it is. So could there, in the original group, there was sort of an overabundance of golden retrievers. Could we have a genetic familial problem in golden retrievers where they are not converting something, or they are not, and a lot of those were low in taurine. So is there a problem where they are not manufacturing or being fed enough taurine? The thing is, legumes have no place in our pets' food to begin with. Grains have no place in our pets' food to begin with. And those ingredients also happen to be some of the most toxic ingredients, just from a standpoint of how they are handled. So those products have a high probability of having mold on them, because the lower quality grains and legumes are sent to pet food because they're not good enough to be used in human food. When moldy grains or legumes come into the factory to be manufactured into pet food, they are fumigated. They are fumigated to kill bugs, rodents, and molds. And when we kill the molds, that's great. The mold might be dead, but when it dies, it releases mold toxins. Those mold toxins cause liver failure and seizures and those sorts of things. The other fumigants that are used for the other pests have a whole different set of issues if they're not processed correctly. So there's so many reasons why we should not include grains or legumes in pet food. They don't process them well. Cats are obligate carnivores. Why are we feeding our obligate carnivores a product that is over 50% carbohydrates? It just makes no sense. So I'm not defending grain-free kibbles or grain-free canned foods and saying they're okay to feed, because they're no good either. But what happens is raw pet food or gently cooked pet foods that are not high in grains and legumes and potatoes get lumped in the grain-free group. And so when you have these specialists who are saying that DCM is caused by grain-free products, it all gets lumped together and it's a fallacy. So people tell me that I don't follow the science. Well, the original article that was that really made all the veterinarians go crazy about grain-free diets wasn't a peer-reviewed article. It was a letter to the editor. That's what everyone has hung their hat on. A letter to the editor, not peer-reviewed. We don't have good studies. And when we do get some studies, which FDA has given up on it, so it's now in the hands of private companies. Well, let's see. The legume lobby is going to give us studies showing legumes are no problem. The grain lobby is going to give us studies showing that grains are a necessary part of the diet. The raw pet food lobby, which isn't going to do the work because they don't have the money that those big conglomerates have and those big lobbyists have, they're not going to do the studies to show that, hey, this is good for our pets, except it is. So anyway, does that answer your question? It's sort of a long answer.
It really does. That's really good. Now, following on from the prescription diet and pet food industry sort of thing, you have discussed extensively prescription dog foods, your Hills, your Purinas, your Royal Canins, and they have a very wide range of diets: pancreatitis, neutered, kitten, diabetes, even cancer these days. Why, in your opinion, you're a vet, are these foods not a good idea?
So the only company that is allowed to use the word prescription diet is Hills. They originally got that term and it is theirs. Everyone else can say veterinary diets or whatever, but they can't use the term prescription. That's owned by Hills. I hate these diets because they're no better than the over-the-counter diets that the same companies put out. In order to be a prescription item, aka a drug, the drug has to go through trials to prove that it works and it does not cause harm. These prescription or veterinary diets have never done that. They have not done the testing and the trials like a drug would. It would take them 7 years per product, although FDA seems to be fast-tracking things these days. I don't know why. But so if it truly were a product that required a prescription, it would have to go through drug trials. Also, there are no medications in those diets. There's nothing medicinal in there. So why are we writing a prescription if it's not a medicine? And when we write a prescription for a medicine, the medicine is meant to be used short term, although we see so many animals who get a prescription for, Apoquel or steroids or whatever, and it's just handed out like candy and they come in every month and get their refill with, no exam, no follow-up. And the same thing happens with these foods. I actually had a client years and years ago who killed their dog with prescription RD. It's a reducing diet. It is a very low fat, high fiber, low calorie, basically a bunch of fillers. They literally kept their dog on it for a year and starved the dog to death. And if a veterinarian is going to write a prescription for a prescription diet, they need to monitor that pet the same way that they would monitor a pet who was written a drug prescription. And it doesn't happen. And they're also used inappropriately. So, for instance, there's a fairly new, within the last decade, lab test called SDMA for kidney failure. And it will show signs of kidney dysfunction months and months, maybe years, before we will see changes in the other parameters for kidney function. That normal is up to 14, I believe. And so I will get records from people where the animal's SDMA comes in at 15 or 16 and everything else is normal. And the veterinarian immediately says, oh, we need to prescribe a low protein kidney diet. I'm not going to say prescription diet because it could be for any company. And so we have a healthy animal who maybe they were just a little bit dehydrated that day. Maybe they had a high protein meal and weren't fasted before the lab work was taken. There are so many things that can skew that within a few points, but we get this instant, oh my gosh, we have to do something. And so we get these very low protein diets prescribed way too early for these animals, and they are literally protein starved over a period of a year, maybe two. They lose all their muscle mass, and then they really do go into all kinds of medical problems. So the diets are used incorrectly. We get animals with struvite stones, which are secondary to a bladder infection. They have nothing to do with diet. They only have to do with, we had a bladder infection, so the pH was too high. They made crystals, then they made stones. And, there are some animals who hide their urinary tract infections really well. We diagnose most of them in February when there's snow on the ground, because then the people can see the bloody pee. So it's, then these poor animals, they have surgery to have the stones removed, and then they get put on a urinary diet to prevent them from making stones. But they don't need one. And they're doomed to life with that very poor ingredient quality diet. So there's a lot of reasons why I hate these diets. They're used inappropriately. They're made with very poor quality ingredients, and they're very expensive because they have a prescription attached to them.
Yeah.
And we have people who are paying $90 for a bag of food that is no different than the $40 counterpart that's available over the counter.
Yeah, I mean, the low-fat thing really does baffle me sometimes, because people will get focused on just the low fat. Everything has to be low fat, low fat, low fat. However, they don't really seem to realize that excess carbohydrates turn into triglycerides in the liver. And so could you speak to that? If I have been recommended a low fat diet because of pancreatitis or whatever, in a nutshell, what ingredients or what sort of thing am I looking for? Is it low fat? Or is it, or what is it?
So pancreatitis is diagnosed way too often, and it almost always gets blamed on high fat in the diet. Well, my dogs are on 40% fat diets. No problem. We never have pancreatitis. If you look at keto diets, they're 70% fat. Those dogs do not develop pancreatitis, or cats. So the problem for our animals, again, they're metasauruses. They're not meant to eat a high carbohydrate diet. A high carbohydrate diet, carbohydrates break down into sugars. That requires the pancreas to release insulin to process that and drive the sugar into the cells where it's a usable form of energy. The pancreas is just on a treadmill all the time, and we get burnout. But cooked fats, this is why I'm a fan of raw feeding, but I don't have a problem with gently cooked foods. We just have to be a little more careful with our fats. But cooked fats oxidize and are highly inflammatory. I have so many records from animals who were put on an ultra low fat, high carbohydrate diet, because calories can only come from protein, carbs, or fats. If we take out the fat calories, that leaves carbs and proteins. And most of these animals, the veterinarians are telling them, oh, you can't feed a high protein diet. That'll be hard on the kidneys. I used to say that before I knew anything 30 years ago. So what happens is the pancreas is always being stressed by the wrong diet being fed. And these animals that are on these processed high carbohydrate, low fat diets still have bouts of pancreatitis. Well, clearly it's not the fat causing the problem. And we can't say that every time there's a pancreatic flare that the animal got into the garbage or was given bacon grease, because most of these clients or pet owners with animals that are prone to pancreatitis are freakishly like helicopter moms saying, oh my gosh, you can't have anything other than this dry, brown, overcooked ball of yuck. And I mean, it's like they won't even give them a treat of something healthy. Oh my gosh, I gave them a green bean, it set them off. It's It's beyond crazy. So people don't look at the causes of pancreatitis. Now, we do have some breeds who are more prone to having pancreatitis. Miniature schnauzers, Yorkies, they're kind of pancreatitis looking for a place to happen. So we better feed them appropriately, which, maybe we have to restrict their fat a little bit. But what happens if we restrict fat down to the levels that I see? Like, I get really weird requests in my inbox. I need you to design a diet that has no protein because my dog is allergic to all proteins. I'm like, that's not compatible with life. I don't even know how you would do that. I need a diet with no fat. Well, that's not compatible with life either, because you know what relies on fats? Our brains, spinal cords, nerves, heart function, liver function, kind of pretty much everything. And so when we restrict all this, we end up with these really dry coats. We end up with neurologic dysfunction. We end up with heart dysfunction. And so again, we are dooming our animals to different problems because we get so hyper-focused on low fat. So what we need to do is get away from highly processed food that is full of pro-inflammatory ingredients, things that are oxidized, things that have gone through high heat and have Maillard reaction products. Get away from products that have mold toxins in them. Get away from products that have cancer-filled meats in them. There's just so many things that contribute, and pancreatitis is not a fat problem. That could be a contributor, but it is not a fat problem.
Great. Right. You've been touching upon certain ingredients and certain things that are probably bad for our pets. And the pet food industry never stops innovating, obviously. It seems to be plagued by choice, different brands, and so much noise. Let's say we are sort of new to the industry and want to provide our dog or cat with a good diet. What are some poor ingredients, some of the no-nos in your opinion? What are the most dangerous pet food ingredients in your opinion?
Anything rendered is a dangerous ingredient. Anything that has to get fumigated on its way into the pet food manufacturing plant is a dangerous ingredient. Synthetic vitamin mineral mixes are a dangerous ingredient because they so often are formulated incorrectly, and so many pet foods buy from one or two distributors or manufacturers. So if we go back a couple of years and look at the vitamin D toxicity that was across so many brands, Hills was the one who kind of was leading the charge on that one. But there was excess vitamin D, and it causes kidney failure. And unfortunately, look at melamine back in 2007. You might be too young for that. Melamine back in 2007, but it came in a powder mix that many companies were using. And in both of those huge recalls, tens of thousands of animals had to die before 2 and 2 were put together to figure out what the heck was going on. And a recall starts because somebody starts to see a trend and says, oh, we something's going on. And so I want to see ingredients that I read it and I go, oh, beef liver, I know what that is. Beef heart, I can read that. And I don't have to be a highly educated veterinarian to understand the difference between a chemical additive and a real food ingredient. So for people who are not familiar with rendered ingredients, if it says something like meat and bone meal, meat byproducts, animal digest, those are rendered ingredients. So for those who don't know what rendering is, they basically take all the dead animals, which can be dead from anything. So it could be a cow that died out in the field. We don't know what they died from. Well, that clearly can't go into the human food chain. So they don't want them to go to landfills. Where do they go? They go in these big trucks and they go to a rendering plant. So we have big piles of different kinds of animals all piled together. So it could be anything really. And this is why when they do DNA testing of pet food, it may say on the label that this is a chicken and rice food. But when they do DNA testing, they go, oh, look at that. We have chicken, we have beef, we have pork, we have horse, sometimes they even find dog and cat DNA in there. And it's because of this rendering process. So they take all those dead animals, which usually sit in a big heap out in the sun for a few days before they're even cooked. And then they put them in a big melting pot, basically, cook them and melt them down. And then they're left with this kind of mess at the end. And then they dry it and powder it. So that's where we get bone meal powder or meat and bone meal powder, meat byproduct meal, because it's unnamed. So you never want to buy anything that is unnamed, which I looked at a product the other day and one of the ingredients was fish. I'm like, what kind of fish? Is that salmon? Is that pollock? Is that sardine? Like, if I have a pet with a sensitivity to salmon, then I'm certainly not going to buy something that says fish. And what that allows them to do, it allows them to use any kind of fish. So it's the parts and pieces and leftovers from the human food industry that, fish.
Right. Okay. So those are the most dangerous dog food ingredients and pet food ingredients. We go from that to something you have touched upon in your books. And I recommend everyone who's watching this to go and purchase Dr. Judy Morgan's books, because they are wonderful. They are a phenomenal source of knowledge, and they will change your life, and you'll know a lot, and you'll find out a lot about dogs and cats. Tell me about fermented vegetables. Why do you feed them, and why fermented for our dogs, not our cats, because they're obligate carnivores again?
Well, actually, even though cats are obligate carnivores, they do need a fiber source. So a little tiny bit, maybe 2% of their diet, can be something like a fermented veggie, or any kind of fibrous veggie, because they do need that fiber. So if we looked at how our cats would eat in the wild, when they ate a mouse or a squirrel or a rabbit or a bird, they would ingest some of the feathers, some of the fur, and that's a fiber source for them. They also would ingest the stomach contents of their prey. And so most of their prey are herbivores, so they have eaten grass and seeds and nuts and that sort of thing, and that's in their stomach being digested, so that's a fiber source as well. Unfortunately, when we go to the store and we buy like a pre-made raw food or cooked food for our cats, even if it's one of those high meat diets, they're not prey model. They don't have that fur fiber source. There are a few pet food companies who are actually grinding like the whole rabbit, so it does have the fur in there as well, whole quail, and I love adding those things into my pets' diets because it's like, oh, that's really cool. That's what they're really supposed to eat. So fermented veggies provide active live probiotics, which are the good bacteria that we need in the gut to make short chain fatty acids and help with our immune system function. So they provide that, but they also provide enzymes, which help with the digestion of the food. And these are natural sources. So it makes the pancreas not have to work so hard to secrete as many enzymes if we're providing them. And then because they're veggies, they're a fiber source, and that fiber source is the prebiotic, which is the food for the bacteria. So we're getting the food for the bacteria, we're getting the bacteria, and we're getting some extra enzymes. So it just makes digestion easier. And it's so easy to make fermented veggies at home. And they're good for us. They're good for our pets. Not all pets like them. So there's other options, but fermented veggies are great. It's great for them.
Great. Right. Let's switch gears and let's talk about vaccines. What are some issues with vaccines here in the UK? And I'm sure you can get them anywhere, really. You can get subscription vaccinations delivered to your door every single month. And so something we do tell people is that they do put unnecessary pressure in the liver, and they don't really need them because most dogs and most cats are pets nowadays. They live with us and they don't really go out all day every day unless you have a border collie or something. So how often should pets be vaccinated?
Oh my gosh, my pets haven't been vaccinated in so long. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I get labeled with that all the time. I think when I was in veterinary college back in the early 1980s, so yes, I am a dinosaur, that was when parvo in dogs first became really known. And we had an ICU unit full of puppies and even some adult dogs vomiting and spewing blood out of both ends, and a lot of them dying, and it was bad. And so that started we need a vaccine for this once they figured out what it was. And they originally used a cat vaccine, and then because there is a parvovirus cat vaccine, it causes something different, but and then they developed a dog vaccine, and we really stopped seeing cases of parvo after we started vaccinating animals. The problem is that it was very arbitrary way back when distemper vaccines were made and rabies vaccines were made and parvo and lepto and everything that's come out. It was really arbitrarily positioned at come in every year for your annual checkup and shots. It's like, yeah, no. So we did that for a lot of years. I did that in practice for a lot of years because I didn't know any better. None of us really did. But then we had immunologists like Ron Schultz and Gene Dodds who started looking and saying, hey, these animals have antibodies against these diseases in their bloodstream and in their bodies for years and years and years. Why do we keep poking them? That makes no sense at all. So all vaccines are different, but we do know that distemper, parvo, and adenovirus, which is hepatitis for dogs, and panleukopenia for cats, those vaccines have a very long duration of immunity for our pets. For some of them, one vaccine will confer lifelong immunity. For others, it may be 5 years, it may be 7 years. We don't know how each individual will hold that vaccination status. And we can only measure circulating antibodies. We cannot measure cellular immunity or cellular memory. We don't have a way to measure that. So if we did enough studies with enough animals where, for instance, we vaccinated them against parvovirus, we got a blood test called a titer that shows, hey, they've got circulating antibodies. And we test them every year, and maybe 5 years in, they test negative. Well, we can't measure their cellular immunity. So a study that could be set up, we could take a whole bunch of those animals who are now testing negative, who tested positive at one point, they're now testing negative, we expose them to parvovirus. Do they immediately mount an immune attack against that, and their antibodies suddenly are overwhelmingly high again, or do they get sick? So if they got sick, we could say, ooh, they didn't have cellular immunity either. If they instantly developed, within a week or so, developed all these antibodies, it's like, great, look at that. They were still protected. And so we can't measure that. So what's the best we can do? Well, if they have a positive titer and then it goes to negative, we could say, well, it's been a few years, maybe it's time to vaccinate them. So, once this came to light that they don't need vaccines every year, the AVMA, which is the American Veterinary Medical Association, and AHA, which is the American Animal Hospital Association, put on their websites that we shouldn't vaccinate with the core vaccines, the ones I've been talking about, more often than every 3 to 5 years. Well, where did they get that number? Oh yeah, that was arbitrary too. It wasn't a study that said, oh, every 3 years we know they need it, or every 5 years we know they need it. It was arbitrary. Again, they picked an arbitrary number. So people say that I don't follow the science. Where's the science behind that? There is no science behind that. It was just, well, we know they don't need them every year. But, and I haven't looked up statistics lately, but when I looked up the statistics a few years ago, 60% of veterinarians were still recommending annual core vaccines. It's like, why? Why? Your own head organizations tell you not to do that, and you're still doing it. And a lot of the reasons that we get are, well, if I just tell people, if I send them a card that says your animal is due for an annual checkup, they won't come in. If I tell them they're due for annual shots, then they're like, oh my gosh, he needs his shots. So there are a lot of non-core vaccines. So lepto is one of them, and I know that's a big issue in the UK because I think is it required over there, the lepto vaccine?
I believe so, yes.
I think it is. And it's a highly, highly reactive vaccines. We see probably more anaphylactic shock reactions and side effects from lepto than the other vaccines. It's not a great vaccine. And it only lasts 6 to 9 months probably, which is why it is recommended to give it as an annual vaccination.
Yeah.
In my practices here in the States, we gave very little lepto vaccine. And for animals under 10 pounds, I wouldn't touch them with it because those are the ones that really, really want to react. It's not something that I use in my own pets. And when we get outbreaks of lepto, it's usually in cities because of rats. It's spread through the urine of rats, raccoons, possums, skunks, foxes, dairy cattle. So you have to look at the lifestyle of your pet. If you have a dog, like I see people with little 5-pound dogs that literally their feet never touch the ground and they use potty pads inside. I mean, why are we giving that teeny tiny little dog all these vaccines? It literally has zero exposure to anything. Makes me kind of crazy. I actually adopted a dog once. She was 3 years old and she had never been outside in her life.
No way.
She was a little nuts. But she peed on a potty pad. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Wow. So would that apply to worming and fleeing dogs on a monthly basis as well?
And you're going to hit them all, aren't you? So my dogs get no chemicals. I try to live a chemical-free existence as much as possible. My worst chemical is coffee. And I am pretty addicted to that. My animals get herbs. They don't get chemicals. And again, if your animal doesn't even go anywhere. So here's a great story. 25 years ago, when I was just sort of dabbling, maybe a little longer than that, but I was just sort of dabbling with getting into more holistic and alternative therapies. I used to supply my mother with her 6-month package of heartworm preventative and her 4-month package of flea and tick topical. And she also was feeding her dog kibble. And so I was giving a lecture, and my mom it was the first lecture she had ever come to. And after the lecture, she's, her eyes got big and she said, "I'm changing my dog's diet right now." I was like, "Oh, right. I converted my mom. This is awesome." And then about a month later, she said to me, "Oh, I need a refill on the dog's heartworm preventative and flea and tick preventative." And it was like January, so it was cold, bitter, miserable winter. And I said, "Mom, do you ever pull ticks off your dog? Do you ever find fleas on your dog?" And she said, "No, I've never found any on her." I said, "Oh my gosh, light bulb." I said, "You think that putting this topical on repels the fleas and ticks? It doesn't. They have to get on your dog and bite your dog in order for them to die." So it finally dawned on me that all these people that are applying chemicals think that the chemicals repel. And so they never see fleas and ticks, so they think it's working. So even the group that I hate, the oral isoxazolines, Bravecto, Credelio, Simparica, NexGard, there's others out there now. People give those orally, and then they never see a flea or tick, and they think, "Oh, good, it's working." They don't prevent them, folks. They don't repel them. They kill them after they get on your animal. So if you have never had a flea or tick problem, why are you applying chemicals? It's crazy because people aren't getting the knowledge that they need to understand how the chemicals work. I stopped giving my dog's heartworm preventative 10 years ago. And so first I went to I'm only going to give it in the summer when the mosquitoes are active. And then I moved further south and it's warm most of the year. And I'm like, well, my dogs don't live near a pond or a lake or a stream where the mosquitoes are heavy. Yeah, we have a lot of heartworm in this area, but my dogs are not outside in that environment. And we don't have mosquito problems. If we sit outside, we don't have mosquito problems. And it's partly about where we live, and not being near the water sources where we're going to get a high mosquito population. So you have to look at the individual animal. And you like, I get nuts when I get records for an indoor cat who was taking heartworm preventative monthly. Really? Why? So you have to look at the individual. This is not one size fits all medicine. If I went to my doctor and my doctor said, okay, every person who walks in this door gets this list of vaccinations. I mean, some of them do. This list of vaccinations, this list of chemicals. Here you go. Without saying to me, well, what is your lifestyle? That would be awful. But unfortunately, many times that is what is prescribed for our pets. And so the pet owner, and that's why in my Raising Naturally Healthy Pets, that one, Raising Naturally Healthy Pets book, the longest chapter is the vaccine chapter. Because I want people to understand how each disease is transmitted, what your pet's risk would be, and it's for dogs and cats, what your pet's risk would be, and why you might consider getting the vaccine, how often you might consider getting the vaccine, and why you might consider not getting the vaccine. So, it's knowledge is power. And for me, educating pet parents and giving them the knowledge they need just gives them the opportunity to be able to have a really intelligent conversation and to be able to push back firmly, but respectfully, because you have the knowledge.
There you have it. So we are not against, vaccinations, or we're not anti-vaxxers, but a bit of common sense does go a long way. Now we are wrapping up now. And so what could I do that's natural for my dog's teeth? And we see that periodontal disease is literally rife these days, because obviously still most dogs are kibble fed predominantly. And, dogs don't have salivary amylase to break down starches in their mouth, and so tartar builds up. So what can I do that isn't silly, in my opinion, like brushing your dog's teeth every day, which is not very practical in my opinion? What could I do for my dog's teeth?
So there's a million ways. So one of the problems is the myths surrounding kibble. One of the myths is that, if they eat dry kibble, that's going to keep their teeth clean. Wrong. Doesn't. So we have to look at the breed and species of animal that we're dealing with. So if an animal is eating a species appropriate diet that includes raw meaty bones, where they're actually chewing and breaking down tartar and plaque, then we don't have to do a whole lot. However, most people are not feeding raw meaty bones. It's across the board not a popular option. And I get it. My dogs don't eat raw meaty bones very often. They should eat them more often. My cats that are out hunting are eating raw meaty bones. My indoor cats are not. And when I offer them, they go, oh my gosh, what would I, the indoor cats were not raised on that. So they're like, oh. They are raw fed, but they don't get the bones. So there are so many options. There are a lot of seaweed based products that you can just add to the diet that work really well. I don't know if I'm supposed to mention brands, but Dr. Connor Brady's product Canada is amazing. And so that is just something that you can add to the food. We have probiotics that you can add to the water bowl that help. And I think it's got some B vitamins in there as well. So I don't know if that product is available over there yet, but it's called Teef, T-E-E-F. Cute name. There are sprays. So we have a dental spray or dental drop that has deer antler velvet, manuka honey hydrosol, peppermint, and cinnamon essential oils that works really well for keeping tartar and plaque from building up. There's just so many options, but when we feed a carbohydrate-based diet, it's breaking down to sugar, like you said, and that actually contributes to dental disease. Now, if you have a small breed of dog, anything under 15 pounds, the chances of you getting away with never having a dental cleaning on your dog are pretty slim, unless they really are good at chewing their raw meaty bones. Most of the big pet food company dental products on the market are actually starch based. They're potato and glycerin, and that's not what, again, yes, we're getting some chewing action, but we're adding more sugar into the mouth. And a lot of them are toxic. So, but if you have a small breed of dog, genetically, they have poor dental health. It's a genetic issue for them. So I have a dog who he was born with a lot of genetic defects. He's got hydrocephalus, which is water around the brain. His hind leg joints bend the wrong direction. He's a happy little guy. He's got syringomyelia. He's got caudal occipital malformation. Like, he has so many issues that he was born with. So he was the runt of the litter. He was about this big when he was born. And he's lucky he survived. And he's a great dog. But along with his, from a Chinese medicine standpoint, Jing deficiency, which is he didn't get all the right parts and pieces, he has really poor dental health. And it doesn't matter what I do. He had his first anesthetic dental cleaning at 18 months of age. He's now 2.5. He's getting his next one. So I cannot avoid it with him because of his genetic predisposition for really awful teeth. So, for people who have animals like that, don't be discouraged and say, oh my gosh, I'm doing everything wrong. I haven't solved the problem for him. It may be that you have one of those animals. Again, Yorkies, it's funny. Before we started really pushing people to do dental care, and before we had all these wonderful dental products, again, way back 20 years ago, we used to say that a Yorkie that had any teeth left in his mouth at 7 years of age was doing incredibly well. And that's because we weren't promoting dental care. Statistically, 80% of dogs and cats have dental disease by age 2, or periodontal disease by age 2. That's a fact. So we need to do something, whether that's a water additive, and be very careful. One of the veterinary water additives has xylitol in it. Xylitol is toxic. So you don't want them drinking xylitol every day, and I have no idea why it's in there. Others contain sorbitol. Again, not as toxic, but why is it there? We don't need it. So look for natural products, look for things. I actually have a really good blog on drjudymorgan.com on ingredients to avoid in dental products, because they're chemicals. Again, if it's a chemical name, walk on by for natural ingredients.
Now, this topic really gets me going, and it's cat food, actually. And I believe that most cat food is infuriating because, as we know, cats are obligate carnivores. They have zero dietary requirement for carbohydrates. Very, very little, as you said. They can maybe tolerate.
They just need the fiber. They don't need the carbs.
So let's say I have a cat, and they are on your meat and animal derivatives, wheat, barley, corn, soy. You've seen rice in the cat's food. How can I introduce a better food for my cat, knowing obviously that cats are notoriously fussy? How do I go on about sourcing a good food and then introducing it successfully?
Oh boy. So one of the things is that the pet food companies that make kibble and canned food for cats, they know the cats aren't going to touch it. So it is sprayed with palatants, which are basically chemicals and fats which turn rancid, but they're sprayed with palatants to make the cat want to even get near it. And the cats become addicted to those palatants. So that's the first thing that you're fighting. Like, your cat has an addiction. So for my cats, when I used to feed kibble before I knew any better. I was trained in veterinary school. Like, you get really attached to science diet in my generation. Now you get really attached to Purina or Royal Canin, which is Mars, or science diet, which is Colgate. So the big three. In veterinary school, you're going to get attached to one or all of those. And that's why we, see the veterinarians really pushing these foods, because that's what they're taught. And so I did too. All my animals were on science diet. And then when I learned better, I went, oh, poo. Okay, so how do I take my middle-aged indoor cats who are addicted to this food and change them onto what I want them to eat, which is a meat-based, at that point, I really wanted them to switch over to raw. So I got raw food and put it in the bowl, and they don't recognize it as food because they are addicted to the taste of the other and the texture. The texture is a big thing for cats. And also the size of the kibble. You would not believe how much money these pet food companies spend on figuring out which shape and which size cats want. Believe it or not, the little football shape of the kibble is what they actually like the best. I don't know why. So I had zero luck getting my cats to go over to a raw food at the beginning. So then they came out with, and you could try just cooking some chicken. I would recommend starting with cooked foods rather than raw, because again, they're not going to recognize the texture. It doesn't have enough odor. If you gently cook something, it releases those odors and they're more likely to want to eat it. So start playing with different things. And I would play with things that cats normally would have as their prey. So beef isn't usually their prey. Believe it or not, my cats really love pork, and I'm like, I don't know where you're taking down a pig in the wild, but they really love pork. But try with different types of fowl, so pheasant, quail, chickens, turkeys, goose, duck. So if you eat any of that, try giving your cat a little piece of that and see if they're willing to go to that. The way that I got my cats to eventually switch over was when freeze-dried raw became available. And so freeze-dried has a texture that is much closer to a kibble. However, we also need to release the smells a little bit. But what I did with my cats is I took that freeze-dried, which was a species-appropriate diet, and I crumbled it and sprinkled it over their kibble. And each day I would sprinkle a little more. So when they're eating the kibble, they're also taking in some of that freeze-dried food. They kind of don't have a choice. I mean, they're pretty good at picking around it, but if you're crumbling it in there, it's pretty hard for them. And you keep taking out a little more kibble and putting in a little more of the freeze-dried. And then I started sprinkling some really warm water on it to release the odors more, but not make it wet because they still wanted that texture. It took me about 6 months for my most resistant cat to get them to go from all kibble in the bowl to freeze-dried that was not rehydrated to freeze-dried that was completely rehydrated. You could also try, there are some canned foods that are better than others. So look for those really high meat canned foods made by respectable companies. And you have a pet store, so I'm sure you know who those are. So you can also try that. And what I would do is offer it first. Well, you can do it a couple of different ways. You can offer it separate. So with my cats, sometimes I'd have 3 or 4 bowls lined up. It's like, okay, here's the fully rehydrated raw product. Here is a regular raw product. Here's a dry product. Here's a canned product. And let them self-select. And you may find over time that they're like, this stuff over here, once I got it in my mouth, is actually better. You can try taking that food, smear a little bit on their paw. What are they going to do? They're going to lick it off because cats can't stand having anything on them. So just be really, really patient. Like I said, it took me 6 months, but once my cats were converted, kibble left my house for good, and I was really happy, and I've never had kibble in my house since.
I cannot thank Dr. Judy Morgan enough for her time, and she was kind enough to share with me all her resources, and all these resources are there for you guys, and I am going to leave all of them just below because you can learn so much from her books, from her videos, from a list. She has recipes, she has how to do things all over her website, and so I cannot encourage you enough to go and check them out, because you will surely learn so much from her. So a very big thank you to Dr. Judy Morgan.